Hello, thank you everyone for joining. The webinar will start promptly at 12, so just about 4 minutes. If you would like to enable live captioning, please do so by clicking the captions button at the bottom of the screen. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. The meeting will start promptly at 12, so just about 1 minute. And if you'd like to enable live captioning, you can do so by clicking the captions button at the bottom of the screen.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to our webinar on advancing innovation through team science, featuring programs from the NIH Brain Initiative. So today we hope to lead you through information about our experiments in how to support team efforts in systems neuroscience in our Brain Initiative Circuits program. And the overall goal of this program is to understand behaviors and brain function at the level of a mechanistic understanding of dynamic circuits and functional networks. So in today's webinar, we'll be introducing you to some background information about the NIH Brain Initiative, and we'll also talk about the purpose and benefits of team approaches in neuroscience. And then we'll also be providing some guidelines on how to apply to our team science funding opportunities, such as the exploratory U01 program and the large-scale multi-component U19 program. And lastly, we'll be providing information on how to connect with us as you consider and prepare for applying. So, a little bit of housekeeping to get us started. We're so glad that you can join us and we welcome your questions. So, how to ask questions during the webinar? Please open the Q&A window and click on the icon Q&A and enter your question into that Q&A box, then click send. And we'll try our best to answer as many questions as we can, but if we're not able to answer your question during the webinar, we'll be following up with you afterwards. Okay, so before we launch today's material, I'd like to introduce our speakers. I'm Karen David. I'm a program director with the BRAIN Initiative and lead of the exploratory UO1 program.
And hello, I'm Dr. Jim Knott, a team lead and program director for the BRAIN Initiative and the lead for the multi-component U19 program.
Thank you, Jim. So to get us started, could you please give us an overview of the BRAIN Initiative and our programs on understanding function at the level of circuits?
Yes, of course. So the National Institutes of Health Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies, or BRAIN Initiative, was launched in 2014 by presidential directive to revolutionize our understanding of the human brain with the goal of enabling new treatments and cures for our society's neurologic and psychiatric disorders by developing foundational knowledge with novel technological advancements and innovations. The BRAIN Initiative is an all-hands effort supported by 10 neuro-related institutes and centers whose missions and research portfolios align with the goals of the BRAIN Initiative. Since its inception, the BRAIN Initiative has invested roughly $3 billion as more than 1,300 awards to hundreds of investigators. So with the BRAIN Initiative, we aspire to accelerate the development and application of innovative new technologies to enable a dynamic understanding of brain function that integrates neuronal and circuit activity over time and space, and to understand how these circuits and patterns of neural activity give rise to mental experience and behavior. After all, it is the dysfunction of these large systems of neurons that is the basis of neural and mental disorders. Without such a foundational knowledge of how the brain works, we would be stuck with the same inadequate medical treatments we have now in 5, 10, even 100 years from now. So based on a year-long planning phase in 2013 by an expert advisory board of scientists led by Drs. Corey Bargmann and Bill Newsom, 7 research goals were identified, as you see here on the left, and were interpreted into research themes for directed and dedicated funding support listed on the right. For the functional neuroscience part of these efforts, to develop an integrated funding plan that would incorporate many of these research themes at once, a group of trans NIH program directors were convened as the Integrative and Quantitative Approaches team to develop funding mechanisms for understanding the dynamic circuits of the brain in the context of behavior and executive functions. Some of the guiding principles of the team's efforts were to emphasize investigator-initiated research plans, and to allow peer review to select the most meritorious research. We sought to emphasize quantitative and theory-driven research efforts, specifically to focus on the scale of the research approaches to include functional units of brain circuits, that is, dynamic measures at the resolution of cellular activity, combined with in vivo measures of behavior or behavior of a well-defined neural system. To advocate for balanced funding for individual and small teams of investigators, in contrast to funding for large-scale collective research teams, and in parallel, to provide discovery path from exploratory efforts at each scale that goes through competing peer review to advance as extensive and elaborated projects and programs. We also developed a special funding track for research opportunities in human neuroscience with the opportunity of direct access to the brain intracranially. The circuits team has also created funding programs for tool building in computational neuroscience and behavioral assay, but we will be emphasizing today the pipeline of funding programs for the team research exploratory projects and the elaborated multi-component research programs shown along the bottom row of this slide. So this next slide summarizes some of the special aspects of our brain circuits program that differs from the standard NIH research mechanisms. That is, to balance support for individual lab science and team science approaches, to emphasize an overall goal to understand behavior and function at the level of neural activity and circuits, and to support adventurous research that pushes boundaries with the best set of expertise and cutting-edge approaches possible. Some of the required elements of our program include in vivo recording of neural activity at the cellular and sub-second temporal resolution, predictive modeling as a deliverable, either at a conceptual or a quantitative level, and then bridging quantitative approaches with experimental design, using advanced and innovative technologies, and finally, utilizing diverse species and cross-species approaches that engage special and exaggerated expression of evolutionary optimized features or offer special technical handles into the methods of discovery. So on this slide on the left, the exploratory team research brain circuits programs uses the UO1 cooperative agreement mechanism and supports up to 6 multi-PIs to develop experimental frameworks enabling a scale up to a subsequent multi-component team research circuits program, or the U19, or a scale down to a brain multi-PI R01 submission. The award duration for this program is 3 years with a 12-page research strategy, and there are 2 non-standard receipt dates per year. On the right, the Team Research Brain Circuits programs uses the multi-component U19 cooperative agreement mechanism and supports up to 5 research projects and up to 5 resource cores. Ambitious, multidiscipline, multi-scale, or multi-species approaches are expected that require synergies among the projects and cores to be fully successful. For example, independent projects that could be accomplished in parallel are not highly rated. The award duration of the 19 is for 5 years with the possibility of 1 competing renewal, and the programs are expected to be adventurous. There's an emphasis on a 12-page overall strategy, plus 6 pages per project and cores for technical description and for feasibility. The reviewers are instructed to consider feasibility, but not to penalize unavoidable risks that are intrinsic to new and innovative approaches. For this program, there's 1 receipt date per year in the fall. And both grant mechanisms expect studies in fundamental neurobiology that is disease agnostic. To avoid redundancy with the missions of the NIH Neuro Institutes and Centers, mechanistic or therapeutic studies of specific diseases and disorders are reserved for support from the appropriate NIH institute or center. Next, Dr. David will talk about some of the advantages and challenges in engaging a collective team science approach in biological research.
Thank you, Jim. So you might be wondering why the emphasis on team science. So the importance of interdisciplinary collaborations is highlighted in this quote from the Brain 2025 report. No single researcher or discovery will solve the brain's mysteries, and the most exciting and rigorous approaches will involve combining expertise and bridging fields as described in this quote. And our goal for our team science funding program is to promote crossing of boundaries of interdisciplinary collaboration to solve challenging problems and questions in neuroscience. We support a synergistic team-based approach that combines diverse expertise, perspectives, and ideas to tackle innovative and challenging goals. In summary, we developed these funding opportunities, the UO1 and U19 funding mechanisms, as an experiment in how to support fundamental neurobiology discovery at a scale that is commensurate to the difficulty in unraveling the secrets of the most complex machine in the universe, which is the human brain. And we encourage you to read our discussion of this brain team research program in our published article, as noted on the link on this slide. So we believe that the best and most creative advances in neuroscience will come from the inclusion and integration of diverse perspectives. And as such, we actively encourage individuals from diverse perspectives to apply for these team science opportunities, including candidates from all gender and cultural backgrounds, all research disciplines from physics to social psychology, including comparative approaches from varied species, also candidates from diverse geographic, institutional, and social perspectives, and also across career levels. And to highlight our experience of inclusion, diversity, and team science from some of our U19s, we're sharing some quotes from two of our U19 teams. The USA Rhythms team notes how their diverse perspectives enhance their collective creativity and innovation, and their group draws expertise from experimental engineering and computational neuroscience. And then the Learning to Learn team highlights the impact of this team science approach to trainees. We found that the U19 provides a rich training and scientific environment to the trainees and to team members across different stages and backgrounds. So that's our background on our motivation for these team science programs. And now let's move on to practical considerations for these funding opportunities. So first, how to apply to the U01 eTeam BCP. And eTeam BCP stands for Exploratory Team Research Brain Circuit Programs. So what is this funding opportunity about? And this U01 program promotes interdisciplinary team science at the exploratory stage. We require collaborations from 3 to 6 PIs from different disciplines who will collaborate to understand the contributions of dynamic circuit activity to a specific behavioral or neural system. So this is a discrete, specific 3-year exploratory program, and its goal is to prepare for larger or extended efforts like the Brain Circuits U19 or the Brain Circuits R01. And we welcome diverse species and cross-species approaches. So these are a few useful things to note, and the RFA number is listed here for your reference. About the budget, we don't limit the budget, but it should reflect the actual project needs. And as I mentioned, this is a 3-year award, and we just have one receipt date per year. So some keywords to note for this funding opportunity are integration, exploratory, interdisciplinary, circuit dynamics. And as this funding opportunity is meant to be an enabling step, the application should describe how will this work enable a future Brain U19 or Brain R01. And this application should be adventurous and pushing boundaries. It should include the best set of expertise and cutting-edge approaches. And it should be pursuing a goal or question that can only be tackled by a synergistic team approach. We also recommend balancing risk, reward, and feasibility, which means that although our expectation is high risk, high reward approaches, please manage the risk carefully. And now to figure out whether this funding opportunity is a good fit for your project, we can help with that. Just send us your AIMS draft or project summary to braincircuits@nih.gov for feedback on responsiveness or just general advice about brain programs that could possibly fit what you have in mind. So that's the information about the U01. And now Jim Knott will describe the larger 5-year U19 eTeam BCP.
Okay, thank you, Karen. So how to apply to the U19 Team BCP program. Specifically, what is the U19 Team BCP funding opportunity? So it's a funding mechanism that is a collaborative multi-component award that allows a team of investigators to target their joint efforts to understand behavior and function at the level of dynamic circuits. The U19 may have multiple cores and/or sub-projects, and that demands a multidisciplinary approach. An example of the organization of one of our awarded U19s is illustrated on the right. Note that there are both internal and external advisory committees, an overall administrative core, multiple interactive projects, and a data resource core to enable sharing information both within and without the awarded program. Now, here's an informational slide on the U19 Team Research Brain Circuits programs that you can inspect in detail from the slide deck. Specifically, we note the requirement to justify total budgets and that there is one fall receipt date per year. Programs should employ multi-component teams of research expertise, including, for example, neurobiologists, statisticians, physicists, mathematicians, engineers, computer scientists, data scientists as appropriate. We actively encourage individuals from diverse perspectives to apply and participate in these programs. So on this slide, of the many advisory tips we offer to our applicant inquiries, we recommend a few here. You might want to consult with your colleagues who have applied or reviewed for one of these grant programs before. The planning process can be demanding and very time consuming. Form a team early and start talking to colleagues and collaborators. The multi-component application demands substantial coordination among the collective efforts. Align roles and set expectations about administrative duties with the team early in the process. There are a lot of moving parts of these, so a dedicated program manager is recommended to coordinate the many moving parts of such a large collective effort. The focus on a unique program that proposes a research plan that can only be successful as a synergistic and collective effort.
So we mentioned the importance of including and embracing diverse perspectives in our team science programs. And so we'd like to introduce you to the PEDP, or Plan for Enhancing Diverse Perspectives. This is a one-page narrative that we are requiring in all of our brain funding opportunities. So what is a PEDP? This is a one-page other attachment that summarizes the strategies of the team to advance the merit of the science proposed through enhanced inclusivity. And when we say diverse perspectives, we have a broad definition that includes diversity in who is doing the research. For example, diverse backgrounds, gender, career stage, and so on. And it also includes who is participating in the research as part of the study population. And also, where is the research being done? So what is included in this PEDP? It includes a summary of strategies and their rationale that advance the scientific and technical merit through expanded inclusivity. It also should include a timeline as well as milestones, as well as approaches to assessing progress towards meeting the PEDP defined goals. Our expectation is that the PEDP will be customized to the application. So it is anticipated that every PEDP will be unique and will vary depending on your scientific aims, the expertise that's required, the environment and performance sites, as well as how the project aims are structured. So please note that the PEDP is a scorable criteria and that reviewers are asked to weigh the strengths and weaknesses associated with these 5 review criteria. But it's also worth noting that a PEDP does not need to be strong in all of these 5 review criteria to be judged favorably and positively impact the score. Lastly, I've mentioned that the PEDP is included in each of our scored review criteria, and in the section 5 of our funding opportunity announcement, you will see this PEDP specific language under that section. So that's it from us. Thank you for listening, and we are happy to take any questions. And if we do not get to your question, we'll be happy to follow up with you afterwards.
Hello, thank you for attending. Good afternoon. My name is Hermone Geber-Hewitt. I'm the Scientific Operations Manager working with Dr. David and Dr. Knott. We'll now start the Q&A section of the webinar. We'll start with few questions we received in advance, but we encourage you to drop any additional questions in the Q&A, and we'll attempt to get to as many of them as possible during the session. So Jim, the first question is, what disease is the BRAIN Initiative working on? What topics and diseases are responsive to this program?
Thank you, Hermone. It's a good question. And let me start just by pointing out that the BRAIN Initiative's funds are separate appropriations from the disease institutes. And so there is an interest in making sure that the BRAIN Initiative is not spending the same money on the same priorities as the institutes. So for the BRAIN Initiative, we have a priority on disease agnostic research, fundamental biology that would apply perhaps to many diseases and to many of the institutes. That being said, it's also true that a specific disease might be a natural perturbation, which will be useful for asking a question about how does the brain work.
Okay, thank you for that. The second question is, what part of the CNS are responsive to this program? Is the BRAIN Initiative only about the circuits in the brain?
Yeah, so the BRAIN Initiative is all about the brain. So it is true that the BRAIN Initiative does not do funding in the peripheral nervous system. So there are other NIH programs, for example, the SPARC, or Stimulating Peripheral Activity to Relieve Conditions initiative in the NIH. There's also a peripheral interoception system that is featured at the NIH, and you can actually Google that term and you can find some information on the interoception and its involvement in the peripheral nervous system. But for the BRAIN Initiative, so the central nervous system is valid topics for research. So that would include the brain, it would include the spinal cord, and it would include the retina.
Great. The next question is, are projects that span multiple institutions preferred? How about foreign collaborations? What kind of institutions can apply?
So one of the review criteria for these BRAIN Initiative programs is, are the best team being recruited to do the research? So that might likely mean that more than one institution, that the participants would be from more than one institution. Are they preferred? No, they're not required. But again, if the team, the best team to do this would be at different institutions, that's certainly allowed. Foreign collaborations and foreign institutions indeed are allowed to apply. That's encouraged, in fact. Now, it is true that the U19 program from NIH is not allowed to be awarded to a foreign site, but foreign sites may be subcontracts for subcomponents on the U19. The U01 actually does allow application directly to a foreign site. If you are applying from a foreign site, you should address the issue of what is the special conditions, what's the special, what's the word I'm looking for, but what are the special conditions from the foreign site that would be available at that site and not available from a domestic institution? So just address that for the reviewers to take a look at. What kinds of institutions comply? Well, you can find that sort of information in the RFA itself, but essentially, universities, small businesses, and also foundations can apply.
Okay. The next one is, what are the expectations on preliminary data for the U01s and U19?
So one of the review criteria, and we advise the applicants and we advise the reviewers on this, is for these BRAIN Initiative programs, we're looking for more adventurous projects that you might do in the standard NIH parent programs. So they are more risky. They might not have as much preliminary data on all aspects of it. There might be technology development that's not finished, and so there would not be complete preliminary data on all of that. And that's all fine, but as an applicant, what you should do is address the feasibility and manage the risk for the reviewers of where you have an absence of preliminary data.
Okay, the next one is, what is the minimum number of components the U19 can have?
So the U19 can have anywhere between 3 and 5 research projects. And then there can be up to 5 cores. There are 2 cores that are required, and there can be up to 5 resource cores that go with the 5 research projects.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. David. She's been mining the Q&A, so she'll ask the live community questions, and I'll tag team with her if needed.
Great. Thanks, Ramon and Jim. So a question came up. My project or subject matter could potentially fit the Brain Circuits program and the parent R1. So how should I go about choosing which funding opportunity to pursue? Great question. We get this all the time. And so first thing is, one thing to ask is, do you meet the requirements of the Brain Circuits program? And that's primarily on the basic systems neuroscience focus. Do you have an in vivo recording at cellular and sub-second temporal resolution, as well as predictive modeling as a deliverable? So first are the subject matter and requirements constraints that we have for this program. And the second aspect to consider is the nature of the science that you're proposing. So what we're looking for these brain circuits programs are those that are adventurous and the type of science that are pushing boundaries in your respective fields. And in alignment with that, we tell our brain reviewers to not penalize unavoidable risks that come with these new and innovative approaches. And then the third thing to consider is the scope. So as we've mentioned is we don't limit the budgets for these, whereas the parent R1s typically have constraints, meaning that you have to get advanced permission if you're applying for budgets above 500K. So our brain circuits programs, not just the U01 or the U19, but also the brain circuit R01, these are very welcoming to larger scope team-based studies, and you don't have to have advanced permission on the budgets. But of course, these budgets have to be commensurate to the scale and scope that you're proposing. Okay, so another question we have is, I have a project in mind, but not sure which funding opportunity is the right fit. What should I do? So this is something we can help you with. And what we would recommend is to send us in advance a summary or a rough draft of your aims. So this will help us prepare in guiding you on which funding opportunity will best fit what you have in mind. Okay, so another question here about the PEDP. I have been on study sections where a reviewer has focused entirely on the first of the 3 PEDP criteria or diversity of researchers and ignored the others. Can that be addressed? So this is what we tell our reviewers, guiding them on how to review the PEDP, because the PEDP is in all of the 5 review criteria. So what we tell them is, as with the full application, a PEDP does not need to be strong in all review criteria to be judged favorably and to positively affect the overall impact score. Okay, so I'll be addressing the next questions to Jim. What exactly do you mean with gender background?
Okay, well, it's not meant to be a complicated term. We welcome all gender and sexual orientations to apply to our program.
Great. Could you also mention eligibility?
Eligibility in terms of career stage? Can you clarify the question?
Right. Didn't provide any information. But one thing that maybe would help is that if you look at the FOA, the funding opportunity announcement, it will have a section there devoted on eligibility. For example, what kind of institutions or organizations are welcome to apply.
And we certainly do encourage people from all career stages to participate in these team research programs.
Right. Okay, next one is the U19 application mechanism eligible for the delayed submission procedure for active NIH reviewers?
Like most NIH projects, yes, if you are in a review, on a review panel, then there is a delayed submission that is allowed. If you make an application and you think you have that condition, you should contact the scientific review officer directly.
Great. And question here is, these are 2 questions that are related. So what level of seniority is expected for PIs on a U01 application? Must they all already hold an R01 as a PI? And a related question to that is, I'm a junior PI. Will reviewers view my career stage unfavorably if I'm designated as one of the PIs in a team science application?
You are not required to have an R01 or any other sort of funding from NIH to apply as part of a team for these programs. And as I said, we encourage the teams to form the best teams possible to address the questions that are posed. And on the issue of the junior PI, if the junior PI is the managing PI, if you might call it that, then you simply need to describe what the relationship among the PIs would be and how the responsibilities would be distributed among the PIs. Is there some other part of the question, Karen, that I didn't address there? Okay.
That's good. And if we are not fully answering your question, feel free to follow up in the Q&A. Next one is, can you provide any further information on how applications should go about describing how the project will enable a future U19 or a future Brain R01?
So I think that's a question about the U01. And well, Karen, do you want to answer the question about the U01s?
Sure. So the U01 is meant to be an enabling step towards future U19 or Brain R01. So what we ask applicants to do is include a description of what exactly is your path, or how exactly will this work as a U01 enable you to address larger scope questions or a more longer term 5-year type of projects. So we asked applicants to include that because the reviewers will look at that, because one of the review criteria that they need to look at is how is this exactly an enabling phase. And so that will help present a stronger case of the impact and significance of that U01 application. Okay, passing it on to Hermone.
Okay. I think you discussed this, but I'll ask it. Is U01 a prerequisite for U19 application?
Well, no, that actually is a good question, and it is not a prerequisite. You can apply directly to the U19 with a team of people with a novel question. So it's not required that the U01 be a prerequisite or any other brain program or NIH program.
Okay. The next one is, if I have a strong background in data science, how do I find other components of U19?
Well, the U19 programs are driven by what's the question being posed. And so what we would expect is that teams of people would get together and pose an important question in neuroscience, and then among themselves would decide what are the appropriate approaches and what are the appropriate people that would be needed to answer that question. So I guess the answer to the question is that the selection of the team is really driven by what's the neuroscience question first.
Okay. Can youth and adults' neural circuits of specific behaviors be studied in the Brain Initiative?
Ask that one more time, Harman, please.
Can youth and adults' neural circuit of specific behaviors be studied in the Brain Initiative?
Maybe age related, right? I guess the question here, so youth and adult type of behaviors. So more of a temporal kind of aspect, maybe development.
So it's,
that's my guess.
Development is certainly a valid question, valid topic. And so as long as, whether it's an adult or whether it's a youth or non-adult, as long as the question is posed in terms of the systems neuroscience of dynamic circuits, what is the behavior that's being studied in terms of circuit mechanisms, dynamic circuit mechanisms. So certainly adults, non-adults, developmental questions are all valid as long as they address the issue of dynamic circuits.
Great. Next one is human neuroscience research covered here? It appears that human brain research is more or less sidelined in these and other related RFAs. Could you please clarify?
So we actually have a brain program specifically for human neuroscience. We call it the Research Opportunities in Human Programs, and I would encourage you to look that up. And so for studies that are purely human neuroscience and it's called the Research Opportunities in Humans. So if they are taking advantage of the opportunity to directly record from or manipulate the brain intracranially, we have a special funding program for that to ask neuroscience questions. That said, a human component to these U19s is perfectly valid. And in fact, the scope and the scale of multi-species approaches is exactly what the U19 is built for. So we would encourage applications that would have human components and non-human components to the project. But like any multi-species project, for the reviewers, you should present what is the added value of each species that you add to the project.
Right. Actually, one of the U19 examples that we presented have one of those cross-species approaches with a human and non-human primate components. Okay, next one. To emphasize, my collaborators and I are fully committed to all PEDP goals. I'm asking, considering that PEDP is a relatively recently established priorities, what steps are being taken to align the programmatic intent with the review process? Great question, which I can answer. So the way our programs are aligned with reviewer guidance is we do we provide reviewer guidance about our programmatic intent as well as PEDP guidance before we have any study sections for the BRAIN initiative. So this is a really critical step for us to make sure that what we have in the FOA and what our intentions are match what the reviewers will be looking at. And also, you've mentioned here that it's a recent requirement for the BRAIN initiative, and so we acknowledge that it's not perfect. And what we do is we listen to our reviewers about comments on how to improve our process and our policy. So after every study section, we ask the reviewers to send us comments to weigh in on their experience about the PEDP. Okay, next one is, for the U01, could you please explain how it works for co-investigators? How would their role and arrangements be different from a co-PI?
Well, my answer for that would be the multi-principal investigators are the investigators that have critical intellectual input to the program of what's going on. A co-investigator would be somebody who has the expertise needed to do some component, some part of the project, but it's the MPIs, the multiple PIs, who have the primary intellectual input to the program.
Right.
Okay. What is the number of awards available relative to the number of typical applications for the U01?
So the award rate for the BRAIN initiative generally is in the 20s. It's actually, I think, been on average 25 or a little over. And we've been able to maintain that for the history of the BRAIN initiative, and that's a little bit better than what you'll see in the institutes. We actually can't discuss issues about applications that were not funded, so we can't give you such precise numbers for each RFA or for each review round. But in general, our award rate is in the 20s.
Okay. So the next one is regarding gender background. My question was broader in terms of URM applicants, and if URM is a criterion considered in this program.
I could weigh in that. So we highly recommend that you look at our PEDP page. Brain Initiative PEDP, and the way we define diverse perspectives is broad. So it's who's doing the research. That could be diverse background. That could be URM. That could be expertise, institutional diversity, and then diverse perspective could also mean about who's participating in the research and also where is the research being done. So we're very inclusive with the type of diverse perspectives that we encourage that will come in this program. So it's not, so I would say it's a criterion. So it depends on what kind of diverse perspective that you would want to emphasize, or could be an opportunity to emphasize in your particular program, and it will be different per application.
I would also point out that in the Brain Initiative, we don't have a pay line. And so in cases where we have scores that are essentially ties, other factors such as diversity and diverse perspectives, career stage, would all be part of the discussion in making priorities for awards.
Okay. Can postdoctoral fellows apply to UO1 prior to a faculty position?
You're certainly eligible to apply. Actually, it's the institution is the door. So if the institution is willing to, because the application comes from the institution. So if the institution is willing to submit your application from the institution, then there is certainly no penalty for being a postdoc for making the application.
Okay. Can UO1, U19 have both animal models and human subjects for the proposed research project?
Well, the short answer for that is yes, for both.
And the next one, are non-citizens and non-residents eligible?
They're eligible as part of the research teams, either as, you know, MPIs, co-PIs, staff. Yes.
Okay. So the next one, brain meetings is in a great opportunity for people to seek out collaborations.
Right. Just a plug from John that we're having the brain investigator meeting, and we'll put in chat that where that would be.
Okay. Will comparative anatomical, behavior, and theoretical studies between mammalian and non-mammalian animals be considered? For example, comparing the neural circuitry of vocal communication behavior between avian and mammalian species.
Absolutely. You know, as I said earlier, every species that is proposed should be justified in terms of the added value of that species. And so often is the case that a non-mammalian species will have some special conditions, some exaggerated evolutionary adaptation that makes it ideal or perfect or advantageous as a research model. So absolutely comparative studies that would include avian and you know, non-vertebrates, as long as you justify what's the added value of that species.
What are the typical funding levels for the UO1 and U19 RFAs?
I think that's probably the same question that we had earlier, Ramon. We can't answer that directly per round, but in general, the award rate in the Brain Initiative has been above 25%.
In the slide stack, Jim used the Anna DeVore U19 as a model example. Looking on NIH Reporter, this looks like a neurovascular coupling U19. So brain circuit in this initiative is more than just neural circuit. Gliovascular and fMRI are considered part of the brain circuit.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So as long as some portion of the program spans the requirements about dynamic circuits, single cells and sub-second resolution, then whether it's neurovascular, whether it's MRI, structural MRI or functional MRI, those are perfectly fine to the extent that they add value to address the question that's being asked. So as long as the cellular dynamics, the circuit-based is part of the program, then other aspects of how the brain works are perfectly valid.
Great. Next one is, I'm a junior PI with no R01 yet. Can I choose a co-I role only to save my ESI status for my own R01, but in reality participate in U01 as a co-PI? So this is what we've been, when we're guiding the team members, is to be mindful about their junior colleagues and their ESI status. So we've had cases where they'll be participating as their status is a co-I rather than a co-PI, so that they'll be able to use their ESI status for their own grant applications, such as, for example, an R01. Great. Another question here is, looks like the chat is disabled. Will you share the full transcript as well as the chat and Q&As along with the recording? So what we'll be sending you all is a recording of this webinar. So that will include the presentation slides as well as this Q&A section. Okay, so next one. I don't see NINDS in the list of participating organizations for the RFAs. NINDS. I would say we'll take a look at that. And NINDS is one of the 10 neuroscience institutes that is part of the Brain Initiative. So I don't think we'll check on that. Okay, to Jim, how is the new NIH data sharing requirement applied to the brain FOAs?
The data sharing requirement applies to us as the same as any NIH award at this point. So you must present a data sharing plan as part of your application. It will be part of the review. It's expected that data will be deposited in archives, and the Brain Initiative has archives for accepting that primary data. The data is privileged data, so it's not shared until you okay that it's shared, and usually that landmark is publication, use of the data in a publication, or the end of the grant.
Next one is, how would a foundation apply compared to a traditional academic institution like a university?
There would be, I'm unaware of any special conditions that a foundation would have to apply. You would probably want to address the issue as a foundation of how there's not overlap in the foundation's support of research versus what you're asking through the NIH application.
Great. Next one is, will the Brain Initiative extend its current implementation end date?
As it is right now, the NIH Brain Initiative sort of has an indefinite term to it. We expect the Brain Initiative is going to last for a number of more years. In fact, we hope it sustains for a long time.
Great. Next one is, how much technology development is encouraged or not recommended?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are parts of the Brain Initiative that are specifically about technology development and technology dissemination. These parts of the Brain Initiative Karen and I are talking about, and Hermon, are more about functional neuroscience, systems neuroscience. But certainly technology development, we hope to have cutting edge technology in the project. So sometimes technology development might be part of the project, and that's perfectly fine. And again, I've talked about how preliminary data might be dealt with in terms of technology development. I would also advise as an applicant, you should discuss alternatives. What if your technology development fails? How will you accomplish the aims of the project if the technology development you're trying to do doesn't work as planned? But it's not a required part of these projects. It's a part of the project. Is it the best way to address the questions that are being posed?
Great. So there's an ESI related question here, which I'll take. I'm an ESI, early stage investigator. If I have a multi-PI role in the Team Science U01 or U19, will I lose my ESI status? Yes, you will. So this is something to discuss with us before you apply. And then we have two questions about the U19 that I'm passing to Jim. Jim, in the U19, how can I figure out if something is a project versus a core?
Oh. Yeah, that is a good question. So you can have up to 5 projects and up to 5 cores. A simple way to say it is a project should be investigative in some way. It should be testing hypotheses. It should be testing mechanisms. The cores are resource cores, so they should be providing some resource that would support the projects, and they should support more than one project. If a core were supporting only one project, it should probably be a part of that project. So cores should be resource cores that support the activities of the research projects, and the research projects should be investigative. They should be testing hypotheses and mechanisms.
Great. And the next question is interesting because I think this will give you an insight on what the purpose are in the different components in the U19 application. So Jim, how are the U19s reviewed?
Oh, so these are big programs, and so the reviews are big. So the way they are reviewed is there's an emphasis on the overall program. There's 12 pages in the application to deal with the overall program. And that's where the applicant spells out what it is you intend to accomplish, what's the importance, what's the impacts, and the overall a picture of how everything will work. So the review starts with a preliminary scores on the overall program, just like any grant application has preliminary scores to start the review process. Then each project is going to get its own review. Each six-page project is going to get a review, kind of like an R01, but it will focus. It's only 6 pages, so it will focus on the technical and the feasibility parts of those projects. So each project will then get an interim score. So if there were 5 projects, we would have 5 R01-like reviews for each of them, and each of them would get an interim score during the review process. And then the cores will be reviewed. Now, the cores are not reviewed on a 1 to 9 score. The cores are reviewed with an assessment that it's either adequate, which is perfectly fine, it's exceptional, in which case in the end it might float the score of the whole program up, or inadequate. If a core is inadequate, that might mean that the projects are not able to be done. So if a core is reviewed as inadequate, we encourage the reviewers to put in the summary statement what the reviewers' concerns are. We allow the applicants, after the summary statement is available, to address the concerns of the reviewers, so that if the problems with the core are fixable, then that will go through an administrative review that we could say that this might be okay, or we could say that no, this is something that needs further peer review. So then at the end of the day, and this might take 2 to 3 hours for one of these big programs, again, the whole review panel returns to the issue of the overall program, and they discuss the synergies of the projects. They discuss how the program must be done as a collective group versus if it could be done as individual R01s. So the first is a positive factor, the second would be a negative factor. And then, like all NIH reviews, the whole panel gives a score. The score is average multiplied by 10, and that is the final score that's reported for the program.
Great. Thanks, Jim. So Next question. My field is molecular or cellular neuroscience. Are there funding opportunities for me?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And so when the BRAIN initiative started, we had a rather limited budget, and the BRAIN 2025 report advised us to focus on a tractable slice of neuroscience, and they emphasized essentially systems neuroscience, understanding the brain at the level of circuits. So that does not include cellular biophysics, cellular neuroscience. But if some part of your research proposal could overlap with a circuit level understanding of things, then biophysics or cellular neurobiology would be a perfectly important part of that proposal. But wouldn't it be nice if the BRAIN Initiative could fund all of neuroscience? I agree.
Right. I would also point out that what we presented to you is just a small subset of, just a subset of RFAs, but the BRAIN Initiative is actually broader than what we've presented. So there are other funding opportunities there with the BRAIN Initiative. For example, we have a wealth of molecular and cellular tools to probe and modulate circuits, and that's an entirely different set of funding opportunities. And in our team-based funding opportunities that we presented to you, we also typically see integration across levels. So we've seen applications that bridge from molecular to behavior types of projects. Okay, to Jim, how is this program different or similar to the NSF Collaborative Research in Computational Neuroscience, or CRCNS program? And can I submit to both?
Yeah, so the CRCNS program is a joint NSF and NIH program that has the requirements of the combination of a computational component and a research component that work together. That's similar in many ways to the requirements and the priorities of our program. So to that extent, yes, they do overlap. I would offer to you that the CRCNS program is really good for projects that are focused on physics, mathematics, pure engineering, which is a emphasis of the NSF, National Science Foundation, because the CRCNS program is reviewed at NSF. And then projects that are reviewed by NSF and co-reviewed by NIH can then be picked up by the NIH for the CRCNS program. The emphasis of our brain research programs is pick a question in understanding behavior at the level of cellular mechanisms. And so if your collaboration looks more like a biological question with quantitative approaches that improve it, then the BRAIN Initiative and the reviews at the BRAIN, the special emphasis panels at the BRAIN Initiative might be a better environment for review. Now, the special emphasis panels in the BRAIN Initiative are across all of neuroscience, all of systems neuroscience. And so the expertise is not as narrow in terms of engineering and physics as the NSF review. The panel is convened of neuroscientists from many areas of neuroscience. And if the emphasis is on neuroscience impacts, maybe the BRAIN Initiative is a good place to put your application. We're happy to take draft abstracts for anybody who's interested in both programs, and we can advise you on which might be a better environment, and then you can make a decision on which to apply to. But no, you should not apply to both programs simultaneously. The two agencies will not fund project, it's the same material in two different applications.
So that's all the time we have, unfortunately. Thank you all for joining us. And if you have other questions, feel free to email us at braincircuits@nih.gov, and we're happy to help. Thank you so much.
Thank you.